Welcome to Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer-engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim, Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Jewish Museum of the American West, and Atheists United Studios. Hey, Joey, I like to think that I grew up in the golden age of cartoons, the 1980s and 90s. Our guest today is largely responsible for making that age so golden.
We're honored to chat with Michael Hirsh, an award-winning, trailblazing producer of children's programming and former head of Nelvana, Cookie Jar, and WoW Unlimited Media. His book is Animation Nation: How We Built a Cartoon Empire. Michael, welcome to Amusing Jews.
Well, thank you, and good to be here with Jonathan and Joey, and looking forward to a great conversation that hopefully will also be amusing.
You were born to Holocaust survivors in Belgium, and your family immigrated to Toronto when you were 3. How did you eventually find your way into the animation business?
I started making experimental films, independent films in high school. So I was influenced by the American underground cinema, and that's what I started doing. I continued doing it in college. And while I was working on my first experimental feature film called Voulez-vous coucher avec God, a friend of mine who was actually a draft dodger living in Toronto at the time had a commission from Jim Henson's company to do 5 letters for Sesame Street. So Jim was looking for lots and lots of shorts, lots and lots of bits of pieces of animation. And he was going to everybody he knew. And my friend Mark Chenoy had worked for Jim, a few years earlier before moving to Canada. And he was too busy with his day job and couldn't do it. But he asked me if I could put together a team of people. And I took my friends who I was busy making these films with. And we basically got trained by Mark in how to do plasticine animation, and we did 5 letters for Sesame Street for the first season of Sesame Street. So at that point, we didn't really know what a Sesame Street was, but we were part of, defining it.
My name is Quincy, and I'm here to talk about Q. Here's a Q. There now. Oh, wait a minute. Hold it. That's not a Q. It's almost a Q, but something is missing. Oh, yeah. I knew I left off something. There. That's a Q.
That's how I got into animation. So up until then, I had been doing primarily, these live action experimental features. And now I was, trained in one type of animation. And my friends and I liked doing animation. And, we went to Mark when we delivered the shows and asked him if he wanted to continue. And we'd go out and, solicit work and get some more projects. And he said, no, he was, that was it for him. He was, he had his day job. He was really happy doing it. And so we went off and we formed a small group called Laugh Arts. And that eventually became my first company, Nelvana.
You named your company Nelvana after Nelvana of the Northern Lights, a Canadian comic book character introduced in the 1940s. How did you arrive at that name?
So the year we formed Nelvana was 1971. So in 70, we were Laugh Arts. And what we found was that people didn't want to hire Laugh Arts because the way we spelled it was Laff and then a space and then arts, ARTS. And people would pronounce it Lafarts. And our business card was a folded business card. On the front was a businessman in a 3-piece suit. And when you flipped the card, he had dropped his trousers and had Laugh Arts on his T-shirt and was just, it was just funny. But not to the local sense of humor at that time. We were sort of, a little ahead of our time for Toronto, where Toronto was at that moment. Particularly in the advertising agencies didn't really want to work with a company that could be known as Lafarts.
Enjoying the show? Click like and subscribe. Nelvana's 1977 television special, A Cosmic Christmas, caught the attention of George Lucas, who hired you to produce the animated sequence for the Star Wars Holiday Special, which famously introduced Boba Fett. You later produced both the droids and Ewoks cartoons. How did this all unfold?
The Cosmic Christmas was our first fully animated show, and it was a science fiction themed show that came out the same year as Star Wars. George was looking for a company that could produce a 10-minute cartoon because in order to keep the Star Wars toys alive through the next year, he had agreed to produce a TV special, a 2-hour TV special, which would be a holiday special, and it would just be enough entertainment to sort of keep the kids interested in Star Wars while he was busy making and finishing The Empire Strikes Back, his second, installment. In looking for a company to do the animation people, the studio and the network were working to get him to choose somebody like Hanna-Barbera. At the time, there weren't many American production companies doing animation. There was Hanna-Barbera, there was Filmation, there was another odd one or two, but basically they dominated the field, and Hanna-Barbera was like 80% of the business. And George is a maverick and was a young maverick at the time, and he had the power to decide who was going to do the animation. And when he saw Cosmic Christmas, he thought, these are the guys to do it. So we got a cold call, in Toronto from Lucasfilm asking if we were the production company that did Cosmic Christmas. And they invited me to come down and meet with George and see if we would do the cartoon for him. And so I flew out to Marin County, and this is an era where, it's before people had mobile phones. So essentially, my instructions were, fly into San Francisco, rent a car, drive to Marin County, go to this town, San Rafael, and find this suburban mall. Go to the corner of the suburban mall with a telephone booth and call this number. And so I was given a number. I called the number, and somebody said, now look to your right, and I'm waving at you. I'm standing outside the building. Walk over here. And so I did. And then I was invited into the building, but I had to sort of cover my eyes because they were doing a special effects shot for The Empire Strikes Back. And George was a big believer in, secrecy and confidentiality. And so I did that. And then we found out George wasn't coming to his studio that day, but I was supposed to follow somebody to his house. So I did. Had a great meeting. We agreed it very quickly on the visual look for how the 10-minute cartoon would play. It was called A Faithful Wookiee. And as you said, it introduced Boba Fett for the first time. And in fact, at the end of the meeting, when George said, well, you're going to get to introduce Boba Fett. And of course, I had no idea who Boba Fett was. It was before he had appeared in the Star Wars universe. So, I said, oh, great, we're going to introduce Boba Fett. And what's interesting is over the years, as Boba Fett has become a more important part of the universe, that's Star Wars galaxy, I can now understand why he said, and you're going to introduce Boba Fett, and why that was a big deal.
You write very warmly about your interactions with George Lucas, and he was something of a mentor to you, correct?
Yes, he was incredibly helpful. We were doing Rock and Rule, and, he gave us advice all along the way, introduced us to some potential distributors, and he looked at early animation and gave us feedback. And he was a very warm, generous soul in terms of, being a promoter of the film community and helping, other young filmmakers to sort of improve their craft. And one of the things that we really benefited from as a studio was, we were the studio that had started in Toronto. There was no industry in Toronto. And we basically were self-taught, but we had a chance to work with George's sound people, Ben Burt, who's one of the world's great sound designers for movies. We worked with Joe Johnson, who is a terrific designer and special effects guy and director himself. And that was consistent along the way. We just had great people to work with, and we learned from them. And our teams of people who worked on, everything from the faithful Wookiee to Ewoks and droids all got the benefit of working with, some of the greats in the industry. So not only did we get the benefit of some mentoring from George, but we also got the benefit of, really learning a lot from great professionals. So it was a very important moment in our studio's history.
Yeah, and as an independent studio, it seems that you were at least tangentially a part of that new cinema movement in a way, with Lucas and Spielberg and Scorsese and all these other really maverick creators at the time. You were doing something very cutting edge as well.
Because we had roots in sort of experimental independent filmmaking, we could really relate to all those, great artists who also came out of that same sort of background. And it was an exciting moment in filmmaking at the time. And, as you know from reading my book, Animation Nation, we did get to work with Steven Spielberg on a couple of projects. We worked with Tim Burton. We never got a chance to work with Scorsese, but, we worked with a lot of great artists, and that was incredibly helpful too in terms of building our studio.
The first cartoon series you produced was Inspector Gadget, co-produced with Deke, which would become your fiercest competitor. Could you tell us a little about the Nelvana-Deke rivalry?
Deke was a French company, and Deke had already done a few series in France, and now they were expanding into the U.S. And Gadget was their first production out of their L.A. office. And one of their financiers had fallen out for making Inspector Gadget. And I had gone to see Andy Hayward, who was the U.S. head of Deke, to talk about a project that they had under option that we wanted to work on, which was not Inspector Clouseau, but Cousteau, the underwater diver. And it turned out we didn't have the same vision for that show, so we weren't going to do it. But as I was leaving, Andy said, we just lost part of our funding on this show. If you can come up with that money, we'll co-produce it with you. So, I looked at the pilot of Inspector Gadget and thought it was very funny and that, yes, we could do that. So we sold it in Canada and got the funding to sort of, complete the funding for the whole project. And we worked together with Deke to co-produce it. But as I was mentioning, the animation community was very, very small and tight in the U.S. at the time, dominated by Hanna-Barbera and Filmation, but Deke was trying to break in and be a player in the field, and there were a few other people trying to break in. And so, whereas we had worked really well as partners to make a great show in Inspector Gadget, they basically became our biggest competitor. They were a dominant force in the U.S. industry in the 80s, and we were the dominant force in the 90s. Both of us succeeded, but at different, points and to different degrees.
You produced a wide range of cartoons during your career, from Beetlejuice to The Magic School Bus to Eek the Cat. Was there a philosophy behind your choice of projects?
Well, that's an interesting question. We tried to choose projects that were, that were appealing to us. So in my case, I had sort of excelled in math and science as a high school student and always had a certain amount of passion. And we had already done a project before Magic School Bus called The Edison Twins, which was the first co-production that was on the Disney Channel. It was one of the first series they ordered. And it was a show that had two twins who solved mysteries using science principles. And, we loved great comedy. So when we saw Beetlejuice, we really wanted to work with Tim Burton and, adapt his movie to animated form. And when we saw the script for Eek the Cat, that was something we wanted to do. We were really driven by projects that we wanted to do, but we were also driven by projects that could sell because at that time there were, only 3 networks in the US, and, animation was limited to the kind of what you might call a ghetto of Saturday morning. And so in order to, sell a show, you had to be very lucky because there were only so many slots and, was very limited shelf space. And so if something could be either pre-sold already like Beetlejuice was to ABC, um, you really wanted to do it. But so each project really has a different story behind it. And but the key to them all was really, I think, how we made them. We really were believers in putting a lot of quality in the shows, like production quality and, working the scripts, thoroughly so that we had really good scripts. We had great voices, great music. And we thought that was really how we would eventually, sort of dominate the industry and succeed was with quality. Because what had happened in the 60s and 70s, animation quality for kids had really deteriorated and was very, very low. And so we came in with full animation and, delivering shows that you could watch today, even though they're 40 years old and still think that they're really well made. So I think that was the key to us is what could we make and make work and succeed with? And what did we like doing?
Were there any shows that you wish you would have gotten and maybe you got close to doing, but somebody else got them instead?
Yeah, so Curious George was one of those shows. We had already done Babar, so we were on a path of doing, sort of great books. And we'd done Tintin based upon the comic books by Hergé. And I wanted Curious George. It was one of my favorites as a kid. We came close. We were working with the widow of the author. The author was Hans Ray, and his widow was actually a co-creator of Curious George. And she kept telling me, George is real. And I just never understood it. And basically, she ended up giving the rights to somebody who had just graduated from film school who walked in and said he wanted to do a live action Curious George movie. Now, that person ended up assigning his rights to Hanna-Barbera, who ended up assigning it to Universal, who ended up assigning it to Ron Howard and Imagine. And it got made, which is great, but not as live action, but that was how, the rights had been sort of won from, the estate.
You don't know what you're doing, Nicholas. Listen to your heart, and you'll find the truth.
Where are they?
Care Bears, stare!
Your classic animated film, The Care Bears movie from 1985, was the first movie I remember seeing in a theater. It's surprisingly dark, centering around an evil spirit intent on destroying all the happiness in the world, and scared the heck out of me as a 4-year-old. Was it just me or were other kids frightened by the Care Bears movie?
I would say that it wasn't that frightening for kids because I attended a fair number of screenings with very young children. But, anybody can react to anything. And it is scary in a Disney-like way, right? The Care Bears were created by a greeting card company, American Greetings. And they had a division called Those Characters from Cleveland, obviously based in Cleveland. And they worked with Kenner Toys, and they were working with an executive, Bernie Loomis, who is kind of one of the legends of the toy industry. And Bernie would always say, in regard to Care Bears, that the Care Bears were Jewish. And I always wondered, what did he really mean by that? Because they're, pastel colored, they're, basically, always looking to do something good for people. But he thought, their shape, their sense of humor, and, they were characters that evoke in him, anyway, for Bernie, it evoked what it was like to be a Jew. And this guy, he's legendary. He's the guy who picked up Star Wars at Kenner before, the movie got released. And, the movie was expected to be a failure, right? So they didn't do the molds of the toys because the movie only opened in 17 theaters. And it was expected to sort of come and go quickly because sci-fi hadn't worked in, a long time. And when it worked tremendously well, they had the problem that, the movie was released around Memorial Day, and Christmas was only a few months away, and the molding takes 6 months to do. So he came up with the idea of selling boxes that were empty, but there'd be a coupon in the box that you filled in, and the company would ship you the toy they had made. So they basically saved, the merchandising program for Star Wars with that idea. That was very innovative. Nobody's ever done it since, I don't think.
Many of the shows you produced, like Babar, the Berenstain Bears, Franklin, Max and Ruby, and Little Bear, are having a revival among parents looking for slower-paced shows for their young kids. Have you been following the slow TV movement?
Yeah, and we were very conscious of that at the time. And, Babar was sort of prior to some of those other titles, but it had what I coined a term, charm and warmth. And, essentially it was by and large a very gentle show, but, there was the action adventure part with the battle with the rhinoceros, King Rataxis. But by and large, the stories were largely framed as Babar seeing his kids having a problem and then putting them, having them sit at his feet while he tells them a story about what had happened to him as a child so that they could learn a lesson that would help them in their current situation. So I think that worked really well. But, Little Bear, I think, is a great example of that kind of, sort of gentle show. Maurice Sendak, was very involved in the production. He licensed the rights to us, and everything from the music to the pace of storytelling was designed to be that kind of friendly, warm, gentle experience for kids. And we did Little Bear for Nickelodeon, and it was actually for Nick Jr. And Nick Jr. had a terrific woman who ran it called Brown Johnson. And Brown was instrumental in a lot of shows that had that kind of gentle sort of acceptance. Because, when you made these shows at that time, you were making them with broadcasters who had bought them. So you couldn't do a slow show if there wasn't the appetite on a broadcaster to take the chance on a slow show. So Saturday morning was always a much more frenetic place for children's cartoons, afternoon syndication as well. But Nick Jr. was a great home for that. HBO, served that same sort of function as well and was very receptive. So it's really a partnership between the broadcaster and the producing company to, have that kind of a breakout that's different from the norm. And I can understand why a lot of parents are looking for that kind of show, because when I look at a lot of what's been made in the last 10 years, a lot of it is very frenetic, and not soothing at all.
Music plays a very important role in those shows as well. Did you have much of a say in that?
Yeah, so I was very involved in what I'd call packaging the music with the right talent. So not every show had a celebrity talent, but in the case of Franklin, we had a terrific Canadian singer, Bruce Coburn, who, did a great job of coming up with that theme. And what his theme did was really reinforce the theme of the show, which was Franklin is your friend, and it's all about making friends and having fun with your friends and spending time with them. So it's a great theme for kids, and it's a great theme for anybody, right?
Hey, it's Franklin. coming over to play, growing a little every day.
Little Bear had scored music, which is really what was very important for Maurice Sendak, who really loved classical music and, sort of helped us pick that direction. In the case of Babar, we also went with scored music. But, in the case of Care Bears, the TV show had a theme song by John Sebastian, who was a great songwriter of that era. Carole King did the movie with John. And then in Rock and Rule, which was, aimed at a slightly older kid, we had great music by Lou Reed and Iggy Pop and Deborah Harry of Blondie and Cheap Trick and Earth, Wind, and Fire. So music packaging was always important. We had a great theme song for another show we did based on Maurice Sendak's book, Seven Little Monsters. And the theme song was by the Bare Naked Ladies.
Could you tell us a little bit about your book?
Sure. So I wrote Animation Nation, and I wanted to capture the history of, these cartoons that we had worked on in the companies that I had built over the last 5 decades. And wanted to share my sort of story, growing up as the child of Holocaust survivors and, going on to do these cartoons that are generally, very warm, friendly cartoons for kids, and providing them with, a good, nurturing storytelling.
Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us.
Thank you for talking.
And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.